Thanks for joining me on this video. I'm going to call it Collar Off. It's going to be just my thoughts on what's going on right now and why I'm not especially optimistic about our government's response to the virus. I want to explain this, or rather just provide you with a set of facts and let you come to your own conclusions, facts that you may not be aware of. And what I want to do is give you a basic understanding of why the World Health Organization is pressuring governments around the world to commit to this rather drastic response of social distancing, of what they believe they know about this COVID-19 virus, what we are actually committed to, and what we can expect in the days and months ahead. First, a couple of facts. According to the American Hospital Association, in the United States right now there is a total of 924,000 hospital beds. That's it. And the occupancy rate, that means the percentage of them that are actually in use at any given time, is roughly, at least as of 2017, you can see it's holding steady, about 2/3. This means that at any given time, there are only 300,000, roughly, hospital beds available to take an influx of unexpected patients, which something like an unexpected outbreak could cause. Obviously, the number of people affected seriously by this virus are vastly going to exceed 300,000 if it spreads unchecked through the population. Now, what do we know about the actual effects of this virus on different age groups? There is an article that has been published by a British organization where they're giving some basic rundowns of the percentage of symptomatic cases requiring hospitalization, the hospitalized cases requiring critical care, and finally the infection fatality ratio. Now note, this first percentage is the percentage of symptomatic cases. All right, there might be an undetermined number of people who actually contract the virus and never develop any symptoms. But among those who do develop symptoms, the percentage of people who will require hospitalization, as you can see from age 0 to 9, is 0.1%. 1 in 1,000. And 1 in 20 or 1 in 20,000 will actually require a critical care hospitalization. You can see the final fatality rate there is very small. And the same is true for age 2 to 19. You get to 20 to 29, where we're already looking at an impossible number of people. We're only having about what? With 300,000 hospital beds, that is 1 hospital bed per 1,000 Americans. And here, if we have 1 out of 100 people aged 20 to 29 who are infected who need hospitalization, we're already seeing a problem. And that just gets compounded as we go on. This is why the World Health Organization is trying to slow the spread of the virus. They cannot possibly hospitalize all the people that need to be hospitalized. But note again, as the death rate begins to climb, and this is the percentage of people, again, who actually are symptomatic. In the age range of 40 to 49, it's 0.15%. That's about at the level of a very bad flu. However, when you get to my age, the 50 to 59 age bracket, we can see that we're crawling up past 0.5%. That means if I were to contract the virus, I would have about a 1 in 200 chance of actually succumbing to the illness. Now, how to read these percentages, you can see in age 50 to 59, 12.2% of the 10.2% who show symptoms will need that critical care hospitalization. That's about 1.2%. Now, you can look at this as it goes to 60 to 69, it jumps to 4.5% who are going to need that critical care hospitalization. And as we get to ages 70 to 79, it starts going up a lot, 10.5%. And for those who are over 80, nearly 20% of them require critical care hospitalization. I want you also to notice that the infection fatality ratio is always and consistently about half of the number of people who require that critical care. Now, everyone who gets a really serious case is going to require critical care. What these numbers tell us is that with absolute full medical care. If you get a serious case, they've got a 50-50 chance of pulling you through. Now, I want you to bear that in mind because this is what we're fighting against. We're trying to make sure that we get full hospitalization. Those final numbers are what is going to happen for anyone who catches the disease. And the fatalities they estimate would approximately and nearly double if we just let the virus run unchecked. This is a curve that they're predicting, and this is the Imperial College in Britain that put out these numbers. You can see how it would spike and then go down about by the end of August of this year. And it would be catastrophic. 500,000 people would die in Great Britain, 2.2 million in the US, not accounting for potential negative effects of health systems being overwhelmed on mortality. What they're recommending is non-pharmaceutical intervention. That's what we're referring to as social distancing. Now, this would, of course, involve people who have any symptoms at all, voluntarily isolating themselves at home for a week. If they're diagnosed, the whole house will voluntarily quarantine for at least 2 weeks. Also, there's going to be social distancing of those over 70 years of age. 50% reduced contact in the workplace, and then overall 75% reduction in contact with really anyone. And somewhat more severe measures, just social distancing of the entire population. No more church, no more social clubs, no more bowling, no more dancing, probably no more restaurants for the foreseeable future. And finally, the closure of schools and universities. Now, this has actually been tried before, and they mention this at the head of this article. How the last time that the world responded to something like this was back during the Spanish flu pandemic in 1918 to 1919. And the United States responded with a variety of non-pharmaceutical interventions, such as closing schools, churches, bars, and other social venues. However, transmission rebounded once controls were lifted. As soon as they stopped this practice of isolation, the infection rate began to go up again. Why? Because the more successful a strategy is at temporary suppression, which is what we're attempting to do now, the larger the later epidemic is predicted to be in the absence of vaccination due to a lesser buildup of herd immunity. If we successfully stop a whole bunch of people from getting it, that whole bunch of people is still susceptible to it. And if we release the restrictions and come out again, they're going to get affected and transmit the virus to the vulnerable population. So in fact, what they're planning and they're talking about in this long-range project from the Imperial College is a series of restrictions over time. You may have the impression that this is going to be 3 or 4 weeks. The initial tamping down of the spread of the virus is going to be 4 months. You can see those blue curves there. And they expect when they lift restrictions a little bit, it's going to begin to rebound. And they'll have to impose them again. Basically, when the cases in intensive care units reach a certain threshold, down come the restrictions again. And they expect to do this for 2 years, during which this policy will be in force about 2/3 of the time. Now, this overall strategy, if it's successful, they admit it's unlikely to be feasible, which means it really won't work unless emergency surge capacity increases. They're still going to have a problem with the shortage of hospital beds. If you read a little further on in the highlighted paragraph, it sees that the general ward and ICU beds would be exceeded by at least 8-fold. Now, they're talking about the British system, but if they're roughly comparable with that here in the United States, that would mean, since we have 300,000 beds, we would need another 2.5 million, or 250% of our current medical care capacity. And if that is the case, and everyone can be hospitalized and treated, they predict that over the course of this 2 years of spending 2/3 of our time in intense social isolation, the deaths would roughly be cut in half, 250,000 for Britain and 1.1 to 1.2 million for the United States. I also want you to bear in mind that the first 3 non-pharmaceutical interventions are meant to be permanent. It's only the last two that will be listed. So whenever somebody gets any kind of sniffle, they're at home for a week. If they're identified with the disease, they're going to be quarantined for 2 weeks. And those over 70 years of age are expected to maintain minimal social contact until there's a vaccine. And 2 years is optimistic. They may have something in a year, and after testing, they could be ready for mass production and get it out in 2 years, at which point we could put immunity into the population. Now, this is why they observed themselves at the beginning of the article that they do not consider the ethical or economic implications of either strategy here, except to note that there is no easy policy decision to be made. If you're getting the impression that this is a straightforward no-brainer, that simply isn't the case. It's difficult to calculate what the long-term effects will be to people who are already living on the margins. This is what we know about the disease, and this is the best case scenario that they expect to get if we actively apply these methods over the months and, as you can see, years to come.